Okay, for our final video for today, Friday, January 20th, happy Inauguration Day, what I want to do is show you how to make a scatter plot using Excel. So what I have are the 50 states and the percent of adults who smoke in each state, and the deaths due to heart disease per 100,000 population per state. Just very briefly, if you look, it's the smoking rates go between 9% and 26%. The death rates, in Utah we have a 151.0 death rate, and only 9% of adults who smoke. In West Virginia, nearly 26% of adults smoke. We have a 192.9 deaths per 100,000 population. If you just look at the data very briefly, Oklahoma has a pretty high heart disease and pretty high smoking, 228.1 deaths. A state like Oregon has 132.1 deaths from smoking, from heart disease. Minnesota has very little heart disease, 116.5. So we want to know sort of what do these data look like in a scatter plot. So the first thing I'm going to do is highlight the data, the 50 data points, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to Insert. And you'll see that there's a variety. It says recommended charts. And this in the middle here is the scatter plot, which is what I want. And if you left click on the arrow, you'll be given about 7 options for a scatter plot with smooth lines, jagged lines, dots and lines. We just want a simple scatter plot for right now. So that's what I'll choose. I double click on that and I get a scatter plot, and each of these is the data point. We can see Utah is down here with 9% of smokers and just a shade over 150 folks smoking. If we look out here, this is West Virginia, where it is actually that, yeah. So it's saying that the death rate there is 192.9. So that actually, the way it depicted on the graph looks just a shade high. And so these are, but this is our basic. So that anyway, so this is our basic relationship between smoking and the death rate from heart disease. Okay. Oh, so this is actually West Virginia, and just a shade down. The scaling on these can be kind of tricky. I will warn you now. I want to make this a little bigger so that it is a little bit better scaled. So let's make it like that. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is change the chart title. And if you simply left click on what says chart title, you can then call it, we'll just call this smoking and heart disease deaths. Okay. And then suppose I want to actually make this just a shade bigger. If I go back to home, or a little bit more profound, I can go to 18 font, I can bold it, I can italicize it, and just sort of make it just a little fancier. Okay. The next thing I want to do is actually have access for my axes, my horizontal and vertical axes. I want to have titles. And the other thing I notice is that my horizontal axis is now back in proportions, whereas my data are given as percentages, and I want to change that. First, I'm going to go ahead and add the title. So if I go back to chart design again, you'll have this prompt for add chart element, and if you left click on the arrow, you get a variety of options. One of which is the axis titles, and I'm going to start with the vertical axis, which says right here, access title, and we'll call it heart disease deaths per 100K population. Okay, that's nicely done. Now I want to go ahead and put in my my horizontal axis title. And sorry, I get a little click happy. Primary horizontal. Okay, so say that here. Come down here, and we'll call this the not percent of audits, percent of adults. Percent of adults who smoke. And get out of that. And actually, if I want to move that, which I do, you can just sort of, whoops, grab hold of it, move it down a bit. Again, we might want to make our, just so we have a little more space. Okay, now the next thing we have is we want to actually come back here, and if you left click, whoops, on this, it gives you sort of the option for formatting the access. I'm going to move this over so it's a little bit more visible. And in format access, then, if you come here to the bar chart, you'll see it says there is the option to go to number. And right here it says, general, and this is just like when you format in a spreadsheet, and we can now choose percentage, and then it says how many, and we really only need 1 percentage point, so we can make it 0.0%, and we can add that, and then you can close this out, and so you have a very nice, at this point, and I'll make it as big as possible here. You have a very nice scatter plot of the relationship between smoking and deaths from heart disease. Now, what you'll what you want to do, or what I ask you to do, is talk about, is this a direct or indirect relationship? And what we see is that generally states that have lower values for smoking, going below 15%, have among the lowest heart disease. Then we see sort of a middle area where it's kind of, a little muddy as to what's going on. There's quite a range between here and here. But then we see in this upper quadrant that, in fact, what you have is that you have high rates of smoking and high rates of deaths from heart disease. By the way, I misspelled heart up here, so let's correct that. Okay, cool. Let's not do that. Click out of it. Okay, so another thing you can then actually do is, if you wanted to add a chart element, or if we wanted to change the, we can add a trend line. And this can be sort of simply, the easiest trend line to add is just a linear trend line. And that you can do that if you want. I would prefer you actually not do that for at least one of your relationships of the 4 that you have, and that you actually try to eyeball it. But it is a way to sort of go back and say, what does this look like? And as you can see, it looks like a direct relationship, where as smoking increases, so does heart disease. Okay, so I hope this is helpful to you. And if you have questions, as always, be in touch, and we'll work on